Genesis 2 commentary. Well, since I'm doing commentaries off the cuff, and I'm not planning a lot as I do these, I'm working mostly from memory and from gut feeling as I reread through the Bible. And the first thing that comes to mind is that there's a controversy over whether or not there are some contradictions between chapter 1 and chapter 2. And here's why this is important. It seems like there are two different accounts of how the earth was created. And to some degree, that's not incredibly far off. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 both describe the creation of the earth and then the subsequent creation of man and women and that type of stuff. But there are some compelling differences between the two, not the least of which is the fact that the second chapter goes into great detail about the creation of man and provides reasoning because man was basically alone. Here's what's important about that. We find out later when we get to Proverbs. There's actually a proverb, and I can't remember where it is right now. Let me see if I can find it for you. Yeah, Proverbs 68:6 says that God sets the lonely in families. Thank you, Google. That's important because God does not want us to be lonely. And there's actually a prescription, like a doctor writing out an RX for us, or a prescription for dealing with loneliness. And many of us will turn to alcohol and drugs and sex and whatever else to deal with loneliness. And God says, look, I've written a prescription for that. I know how to cure it. I have the medicine for it. It's called family. Now, traditionally, family, of course, is what we know it to be, which is, dad and mom and kids and, whatever else. But family is much bigger than that. Family are people that love you no matter what. I specifically in my own life have been just wildly abandoned by my own family, starting as early as, 3 years old with my mother having taken off and never coming back until the day she died. Created a huge hole in my heart and the need for significant amounts of counseling, and created a very angry young man out of me because of that. And there were some other significant factors. The self-esteem issues that it created eventually put me in a position at school, especially in elementary and junior high, to be someone that I just believed I was supposed to be picked on. So I was bullied and beat up to a bloody pulp, starting with, the abandonment of my mother, who abandoned me. And it led itself into my 20s, which then started affecting my finances, and in my 30s began affecting my ability to make commitments to women. And it's amazing how when you are lonely and how when you are someone who doesn't have the prescription that God writes for you for your life, how that can just spiral out of control. And so this is why this particular chapter of the Bible is so incredibly important, especially when you take it in context of Proverbs 68, where it says God puts the lonely in families. Remember, God's reason for creating a woman for the man was because he was alone. Now, here's why that's even more significant. There is nothing on earth that will fulfill us more than Jesus. There's nothing on this planet or in this universe or in creation that can make us more satisfied than God himself. And here Adam is in a state of absolute perfection, in a state of absolutely not needing anything. And yet God says it's not good for you to be alone. How is he alone? God is right there with him. Because we need people that are like us, that we can relate to. People that understand us at the level where we are at. It's why Jesus came here and did what he did, beyond the desire on God's part to save us from ourselves and from our sin and from an eternity without him. It's a really important concept to understand when the Bible says that Jesus learned obedience through the things that he suffered. Jesus wasn't just the Son of God. He was God. He was God himself in the flesh. Now, he left all the godly attributes behind. So it presented the opportunity for God himself to learn something. By choice, he came here and emptied himself completely for us. And among the reasons why he did that, besides the obvious, which was to save us, was so that he could relate to us. So that we could never again have to wonder whether or not God understands our affliction, whether he understands our state of loss that we feel in ourselves when somebody dies. You saw what happened with several people around Jesus when they died and how he wept for them. This is a man who was God in the flesh, and death still caused him to weep, with him knowing full well he would see them again someday. If there's anybody who knows how unpowerful death truly is at the end of the age, it would be Jesus, yet he wept when people died. So he gets it. God gets it. And he gets it because he was here and he was one of us. There has never been a time in history where it has been more accurate, at least from our humanly perspective, because it's always been incredibly accurate, that God really gets who and what we are and what it's like, and we are not alone if we just have Jesus. It's a tough thing to grasp, though, because all of us want more than a God that feels so far off. And let's be honest, there are plenty of days where it feels that way. Thank God we don't live by our feelings, right? So that's probably one of the most important things from the creation of man and woman, is the reason that God did it. And he tells us right there, because it wasn't good for man to be alone. It's pretty cool to read through most of the stuff that you see in the chapter from a creation standpoint. There are those who point out that there are some differences between chapters 1 and 2, and there are. I'm of the belief, and this is, at least in my life, quite important, that there are going to be some things that we don't understand that are going to look like contradictions on this side, and we just have to make a decision at some point. Is God real or not? Is Jesus real or not? That would mean that the contradictions are perceived and not real. And I can't prove that on this side of heaven. But what I can prove, at least to myself, is that God is real and that Jesus is real. And I accept some of these perceived contradictions as just that, perception. We'll see better on the other side. The Bible tells us that in 1 Corinthians 13. We see dimly now, but we will see clearly when we see him face to face. And a lot more of this stuff that doesn't look like it fits together will fit perfectly on the other side. And that's what faith is, the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of the things that I don't see yet, which is how these puzzle pieces fit together. One last thing. One of my favorite things that happens at weddings is, and it started when I was very young in the Lord, when I was first got saved and went to a wedding where there were Christians, and it doesn't happen at every Christian wedding, but it has happened at several of the weddings over the years that I've been to, where when they take their vows, the pastor or the preacher or the person officiating the ceremony will point out that God did not take the woman out of the man's head, that she should be above him, or out of his feet, that she should be below him, but out of his ribs, so that she should be beside him. And this sort of compelling notion, or perceived compelling notion, that men rule over women. There's a difference between leadership and ruling over people, is just ridiculous. And there's not a lot of time to go into it now, and there's other scriptures that we will cover it quite extensively, that women are meant to be leaders, and women are not meant to be walked on and treated like crap and otherwise humiliated or treated like second-class citizens. She was made out of his side, and he called her woman because she came out of him. And men, we are to treat women like they are our partners, not our slaves. I think that's very important for us to understand.